My name is Viral, I am 42 years old, and for more than half my life, my universe revolved around the cold corridors of the Guadalajara courts. As a criminal defense attorney, I learned to dissect the truth, to find flaws in logic, and to construct narratives that could convince judges and juries. I was good at it, respected, successful, and, for all intents and purposes, the pillar of an exemplary Christian family, married to a priest, mother of 2 young adults active in the church, Sunday school teacher. I fulfilled all the requirements. My faith was a fortress built with the bricks of routine, morning prayers, Bible reading, faithful tithes. I had absolute certainty of my salvation, a conviction as solid as the legal codes I handled every day. But on the morning of October 18, 2024, a Friday that began with the smell of coffee and a case review, a sharp pain in my chest rewrote all the laws of my universe. The steering wheel of my car became the only thing keeping me grounded in reality as I drove in a panic to the hospital. The last thing I saw was the emergency room sign. Before the world dissolved into nothingness, the doctors later told me, with a mixture of astonishment and technical jargon, that my heart had simply stopped, a massive heart attack. For 26 minutes, I was clinically dead on that gurney, 26 minutes in which they took turns performing CPR, in which they applied electric shocks to my chest 21 times, to the point where a young nurse began to pray aloud as a last resort. For them, it was a frantic battle against time, a heroic effort to rescue a body that had already given up. For me there was no battle, no tunnel of light, no smooth step into the afterlife. It was a snap, in the blink of an eye. The vision of the fluorescent lamps on the emergency room ceiling was replaced by the perception of standing fully whole in a place where the very air vibrated with a consciousness. The reality of that place was so overwhelmingly dense and vivid that by comparison, my entire 42-year life seemed a pale shadow, a forgotten dream from which I had just awakened. I had never felt so alive, so present, so terrifyingly real. And then I saw him, not the Jesus of Renaissance paintings, with soft features and an ethereal gaze. Forget any image your mind has ever conceived. The figure before me was forged in a holiness so intense it was almost violent. Her presence didn't just radiate light, it emitted an absolute truth, a purity so concentrated that every impure atom of my being screamed in agony. Her eyes weren't orbs of gentle compassion, they were portals to the very foundation of reality, and they scrutinized me not to judge me, but to disintegrate me, to expose every layer of self-deception I had built up over decades. It wasn't a decision, it wasn't an act of reverence, it was an involuntary collapse. My knees buckled, and my face crashed against the floor of that place that seemed more solid and real than any rock on earth. Before that overwhelming holiness, the only possible response was to prostrate myself and wait to be annihilated. Hope. She said my name, and the sound of that single word contained the echo of every second of my existence, every white lie, every hurried prayer, every hidden thought, every secret ambition. It was all contained in the way he pronounced my name. With my face still pressed against the ground, the lawyer in me tried to formulate a defense, an appeal based on my spotless record. Lord, I don't understand, I managed to whisper a trembling thread. I served you for 26 years. I pray, I fast, I read the Bible, I give you my tithes. My religious credentials, which always seemed so impressive on earth, sounded pathetic and empty in that place. Get up, he commanded. The command wasn't harsh, but it carried an authority that he reconfigured my own will, and I obeyed. It was then that I saw what he was holding. It wasn't a book or a scroll, it was as if he had ripped the spiritual essence from my entire professional life and was holding it in his hands, and what I saw took my breath away. A dark, deformed mass, pulsing like a diseased organ, a living darkness that I had nurtured every day, mistaking it for success. Jesus looked from that pulsing darkness in his hands directly into my eyes, and his question didn't need to be spoken to resonate in the core of my soul. Do you want to understand why so many who profess to love me are at this very moment walking toward perdition because of this? Before I could even formulate an answer, The reality around us dissolved and was rebuilt with the speed of a thought. We were transported to what my lawyer's mind could only process as some kind of cosmic courtroom, a celestial archive of unimaginable scale. There were no walls, only rows and rows of records stretching for an eternity in every direction. Each one shone with its own light, documenting a life in real time. There were millions, perhaps billions of souls being recorded, every choice, every second, every intention. The sheer scale of that place was overwhelming. I, who had always considered myself important in my little world, felt reduced to a grain of dust, a terrified spectator in the most important court of law in existence. "Look," she commanded, and her voice, though calm, drew my attention with irresistible force to a single record floating before us. It wasn't a document, it was a living window into a woman's life. I watched it, fascinated and horrified. She was about 38 years old, a successful professional, the kind of woman I would admire on earth. The record showed her waking up at precisely 5 a.m. The first thing her hands reached for wasn't a glass of water or her husband's face beside her, but the smartphone on the nightstand. Her eyes barely adjusted to the darkness of the room before they were already scanning a deluge of work emails. For a whole hour, before even putting her feet on the floor, she answered messages, scheduled meetings, and solved problems. Breakfast was wolfed down, her eyes glued to a tablet. The commute to the office was filled with business calls, 12 uninterrupted hours in a suffocating routine of cases, meetings, more emails, with lunch slurped over the keyboard. The evening at home was just an extension of the office until exhaustion finally overcame her. "Do you recognize me?" Jesus asked, and the impact of those words was physical, like a punch to the gut that stole all my breath. The cold sweat that ran down my back wasn't a bodily memory, it was a reaction from my own soul. That woman wasn't just someone like me, she was me. Every detail was mine, the model of the tablet, the way she frowned, reading a complicated email, the make of the car she drove in Guadalajara's infernal traffic. It was my routine of the last 20 years projected before me in its monotonous and obsessive totality. It wasn't just the job, it was the compulsion, the unhealthy need to always be producing, always busy, always proving my worth through my productivity. The instinct to defend myself, so deeply ingrained in me, kicked in. "But, sir," I protested, my voice sounding weak and childlike, "I work honestly, I help people, I fight for justice, it's a dignified job." He didn't respond with an argument. Instead, he simply touched the surface of that living record, and the perspective of the scene shifted, revealing a layer I had never been able to see. Now I saw my spiritual moments within that same routine: morning prayer, a hurried 3 minutes, recited while I put on my makeup, my mind already completely absorbed in the first meeting of the day; Bible reading, a verse read in 2 minutes on the app on my phone, the content of which I forgot before even closing the screen; my time with family, dinners interrupted by phone calls, weekends sacrificed to deadlines. And then his voice cut into my soul with the precision of a surgical scalpel, exposing the truth I had ignored for so long. 3 minutes with me, he said, and each word carried the weight of eternity. 12 hours with your true God. Do you understand what this means spiritually? Hope? The ground seemed to disappear beneath my feet as I finally began to grasp. Before that I could articulate any response or defense to the accusation against me, the scene shifted once again. In an instant, we were in my own house, but I saw it through a spiritual filter that left me breathless and with a queasy stomach. Everything seemed the same. The furniture, the family photos on the walls, but superimposed on that physical reality was a layer of spiritual activity that had always been there, invisible to my mortal eyes. Jesus led me to my office, the room in the house where I spent most of my nights and weekends. Horror paralyzed me. What for me was just a desk with a computer and stacks of files was, in the spiritual dimension, literally an altar. It wasn't a symbol, it wasn't a metaphor, it was a dark and imposing stone altar, and upon it was a shadowy energy that fed on my dedication. Every extra hour I worked was an offering I placed there, Every weekend sacrifice to meet a deadline was an incense whose smoke rose from that altar. Every moment with my family that I traded for just one more email was an offering poured at the base of that profane structure. Do you think idolatry is just about golden statues and metal calves? Jesus said, and in his voice there was such a profound sadness that did seem to carry the weight of millennia of wayward hearts, yet they have built the most sophisticated and socially acceptable idols in the history of humankind, idols that they not only worship, but for which they are applauded and rewarded by their culture. He gestured toward the altar which was my office. Anything that receives more of your time, your devotion, your attention, your energy, and your heart than I do, is your God. It doesn't matter if it takes the form of a career, a bank account, a hobby, or even a ministry. If it occupies first place, the place that belongs to me, then only I have become an idol, and work, the pursuit of success, and the obsession with productivity have become the great invisible idol of your generation. The clarity of his words was merciless, undoing all my justifications and leaving me naked before my own transgression. Then he showed me something that was in some ways even more devastating. The scene shifted, and now I was observing the Sunday service at my own church. From a human perspective, it was a picture-perfect scene. The sanctuary was packed. The praise band was playing energetically, people were singing with their hands raised, and the pastor was preaching a powerful message. It was the portrait of success and blessing. Now look with the eyes of the Spirit, Jesus whispered, and the picture was torn apart. Physically, the people were there, but when I looked into their souls, I saw the terrible truth. More than half the congregation was mentally absent. Their minds, even during worship, were still processing spreadsheets, planning the work week, replaying meeting discussions, preoccupied with goals and deadlines. I saw business people with their eyes closed in supposed prayer, mentally negotiating deals. I saw doctors as they sang about surrendering everything to God, thinking about the complex surgery the next day, and then, with a shock that broke me in two, I saw myself, sitting in my place of Saint-Fe habit, physical presence, singing the right words, but my mind was miles away, completely absorbed in the defense strategy of a case I would begin judging on Monday. That's why, Jesus revealed, as the scene of that empty worship unfolded before us, there is so little genuine power in many of my churches today. They are full of bodies, but hearts have been left behind, chained to office desks. His voice was not one of condemnation, but of a deep lament, like a bridegroom whose love is unrequited. They come to my temple on Sunday and sing of overcoming me first, but the throne of their lives from Monday to Saturday is occupied by their career. They offer me the works of their time and energy after having given their best, their strength and passion to their true God, work. They perform a religious ritual for 1 hour, hoping that it will compensate for the 80 hours of worship they dedicate to the altar of professional success. But the heart cannot serve two masters. No one can. The truth of those words hit me with the force of a wave, drowning me in the realization of my own hypocrisy. The church scene dissolved, and we were transported to a place I knew even more intimately, my son Samuel's room. He was 20 years old, a brilliant law student, following in my footsteps. The sight at first filled me with pride. It was 3 a.m., and he was bent over his books, surrounded by bookmarks and stacks of notes. But again, the spiritual perspective revealed the sickening truth behind that image of dedication. The energy in the room wasn't one of passion for learning, but of feverish anxiety, a desperate obsession with perfect grades and the success they promised. "Your son doesn't know me," Jesus said beside me, his calm voice making the revelation all the more brutal. "He knows only the gospel of success that you've preached with your life, not with your lips. He spends 16 hours a day chasing academic and professional approval, searching in diplomas for the salvation that only I can offer. He's on a path to perdition, and you applaud him, thinking he's on the right path. But that's responsibility, that's dedication." I stammered. The words came out in a defensive reflex, trying to protect not only my son, but the very foundation of my philosophy of life. He's striving, building a secure future. That can't be a sin. The look Jesus gave me at that moment broke me. There was love in his eyes, a deep and compassionate love, but there was also an uncompromising severity, the severity of a surgeon who needs to cut deep to remove a deadly cancer. He didn't refute my argument. He didn't need to. The reality he was about to show me would be more eloquent than any words. He simply placed his hand on my shoulder, a touch that seemed to hold both comfort and warning, and said, "Hope, let me show you where the path ends for those who spend their entire lives worshipping work." The world around us dissolved into a vortex of darkness and sound. The heat struck me first. It wasn't the heat of fire that scorches the skin, it was something infinitely worse, a heat that penetrated the soul, a spiritual dryness that evaporated any trace of hope or peace, leaving behind only an eternal and unquenchable thirst. Then came the sounds, a cacophony of agony that seeped into every crevice of my consciousness. They were screams, wails, the gnashing of teeth in utter frustration, the desperate weeping of someone who realized too late that they had made an eternal mistake. We were on the brink of hell, and the reality of that place was so much more horrifying than any sermon I had ever heard that my mind nearly shattered. There were no horned demons or cauldrons of sulfur, only darkness, despair, and the suffocating presence of God's complete absence. It was a place defined not by what it contained, but by what it lacked: love, light, rest, hope, and that absence was an active and relentless torment. My gaze swept over the multitudes of souls in that place of torment, and what I saw shattered me in a way that the altar in my office could not. I expected to see the criminals I had defended, the monsters society condemned, but I didn't recognize any faces. They were fellow lawyers, business people I met at events, doctors and engineers who attended my own church. They were good, hard-working, honest people, pillars of their communities. "Look more closely," Jesus commanded, and the scene zoomed in on a specific group. The horror intensified as I realized the nature of their torment. Each soul was imprisoned in a grotesque, distorted version of their former work environment. I recognized an accountant from a large corporation, eternally trapped in a doorless room before an endless stack of ledgers, trying to close a balance sheet that never balanced, under overwhelming pressure that never eased. I saw a doctor, a pious woman I knew from church, in a macabre spiritual hospital, tending to an endless line of patients, performing surgeries that never ended, consumed by utter exhaustion, with not the slightest chance of rest. She screamed that she only wanted to sleep for 5 minutes, but the work never, ever stopped. But why? I cried out over the incessant wailing, the sound of my own voice seeming strange and fragile. Why are they here? They were good, honest, hard-working people. They weren't murderers or thieves. I was still trying to apply the logic of my earthly court to the unyielding justice of eternity, and the dissonance was maddening. Jesus didn't respond with a speech. He simply said, "Look at the numbers," and then, above the heads of each of those tormented souls, spiritual statistics floated in the air like digital epitaphs. The numbers varied, but the pattern was terrifyingly the same across the tally. Total hours lived, 603, hours spent on work and professional concerns, 350,000, hours spent with family, 40,000, hours truly devoted to me in prayer and heartfelt worship, 850. The math was brutal and irrefutable. They gave me the works of their lives, and they called that a relationship. Jesus continued, his voice cutting through the fog of pain. They spent their entire lives worshipping the God of work, success, and money. Now they will simply spend eternity with the God they chose. Then, my gaze was drawn to a lawyer. Perhaps 55 years old. I didn't know him personally, but his face was familiar. One of those respected names in the Guadalajara legal community. He wasn't reviewing files, he was chained to his antique mahogany desk, shouting in an empty courtroom, defending himself before an invisible judge. His words made me weep with terror and compassion. But I went to church every Sunday, I tithed from every case I won. I was an honest professional, I never cheated a client. His voice echoed in the void, filled with a righteous indignation that was now useless, and another voice, dispassionate and final, echoed in response from nothingness. "It is true, but you knew all the penal codes by heart and couldn't quote 10 verses from my word. You knew all the legal precedents that could save a client. But you didn't know the one path that could save your own soul. You chose your profession as your God and served it with all your heart, all your soul, and all your understanding. This can't be real. I'm shaking my head in denial, refusing to accept that hard work, something so valued, could lead to damnation. Jesus then turned to me and with terrible gentleness showed me something even more terrifying than the hell around us. It was the future of my own family. The scene changed, and I saw my son Samuel at 30 years old. He had become the brilliant lawyer I always wanted him to be, a partner at a big firm with a luxury car and a penthouse apartment, but his eyes were empty, his soul hollow. He was a workaholic, just like me, and his marriage was in ruins. I saw his wife crying alone night after night and his young children talking about their father as a stranger who sometimes showed up at home. Then I saw my daughter Paloma, a renowned doctor, head of department at a large hospital, successful on the outside, but inside, a well of darkness. I saw her masking a deep depression with more shifts, more research, more achievements, until the day I found her in her luxurious home, after a suicide attempt that no one saw coming, because everyone assumed that professional success was synonymous with happiness. Your children are just following the example you set, Jesus said, as images of their bleak future burned in my mind. You didn't need to teach them with words, you indoctrinated them with every hour you spent in the office instead of with them. You taught them that an 80-hour work week is normal and admirable. You taught them that weekends are opportunities to produce more. You taught them that vacations are a waste of precious time. You taught them, through your constant absence, that professional success is more important than spiritual health, more valuable than family time, more urgent than a relationship with me. Every word was a nail being hammered into the cross of my guilt. I wasn't just an idolater, I was a high priestess of this cult, actively sacrificing my own children on the altar of my ambition, calling it giving them a better future. And then he showed me something that completely shattered me, because it wasn't a vision of the future, but a painfully recent memory. The scene was my living room, just 4 weeks before the heart attack. Rodrigo, my husband, approached me while I, as usual, had my laptop on my lap, finishing up an appeal. He had an expression of pain and weariness on his face that I, in my obsession, hadn't even registered at that moment. Esperanza, we need to talk, he said, his voice low and hesitant. I can't remember the last time we had dinner together when he wasn't answering emails or taking calls. My response, which at the time seemed perfectly reasonable, now sounded monstrous to my own ears. Not now, Rodrigo, please, I have a very important trial tomorrow. And then I saw the light in his eyes fade as he answered almost in a whisper, you always have a very important trial tomorrow. In that vision, I could see what was invisible to me at the time, his heart breaking and, for the first time in 24 years of marriage, the idea of divorce forming in his mind as a real and liberating possibility. As the image of my desolate husband faded, the voice of Jesus echoed in the silence, not with anger, but with a clarity that exposed the tragic irony of my life. You were so busy, he said, using all your talent and energy to save your clients from jail, that you didn't realize your own family was trapped in loneliness and desperately needed to be saved by you. The simplicity of that sentence completely disarmed me. My entire identity was built on the image of being an advocate, a savior in the courtroom, and yet, in the most important courtroom of all, the one in my own home, I was the prosecutor, the accusing party, the primary cause of the suffering of those I was meant to protect. Above all, I was winning cases for strangers and losing my family in the process, and the worst part is, I hadn't even noticed the trade-off I was making. Next, the vision I will never forget was my own funeral. The church was packed, a testament to my success. I saw my colleagues, judges, prosecutors, important clients, all paying their respects. I listened to the eloquent speeches about my brilliant career, about the tough cases I won, about my reputation as one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the state. They spoke of my intellect, my tenacity, my impressive professional achievements. But as I listened, An icy emptiness began to form in my soul. Where were the testimonies of lives I had transformed for Christ? Where were the people I had discipled? The souls I had brought to the feet of Jesus? Where were the spiritual fruits of 26 years of professing to be a Christian? There were none. My legacy was a collection of court victories, an impeccable professional resume, but a spiritual desert. Rodrigo sat there in the front row, distant and resigned. My children, Samuel and Paloma, were physically present, but their spirits were miles away, disconnected from me and the religious charade that had been our family life. A body lay in the I had literally worked until my heart exploded. You died as you lived, working, Jesus concluded, his voice sealing the verdict on my life, and then he revealed the final detail, the coup de grace that pulverized what remained of my pride. Your last conscious thought before your heart stopped wasn't about eternity, it wasn't about your family, it wasn't about me. He paused, letting the weight of the silence crush me. It was about a deadline for filing an appeal in a court case. In that moment, I understood the full extent of my failure. I had won the professional world and, in the process, had lost my own soul. The scene of my funeral dissolved, and my perspective expanded. Now I saw not just my life, but a vast and desolate panorama of thousands of other Christian professionals in their daily routines. It was like flying over a battlefield where people were fighting the wrong war. I saw doctors working 36-hour shifts, so exhausted they didn't have the strength for a 5-minute prayer before collapsing in bed. I saw entrepreneurs building colossal financial empires celebrated in business magazines while their marriages and their children's faith crumbled into silent ruins. I saw teachers working 3 shifts to pay the bills, devoting all their energy to other people's children, becoming complete strangers to their own. They were all good, decent people who sincerely believed they were doing the right thing, unaware that they were marching toward the same precipice as I was. Work has become the golden calf of your generation, Jesus explained as we watched that army of exhausted souls. They worship it, sacrificing everything for it, their health, their families, their peace of mind. They build their entire lives around it, and the worst part is they do it with a clear conscience because they justify it with pious language. They call obsession responsibility, they call neglect and family provision, they call unchecked ambition dedication to the glory of God. But where in my word did I instruct them to do that? Her rhetorical question hung in the air, heavy and condemning. I said, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. I didn't say, seek first professional success and a prestigious career, and maybe, if there's time left over, think about kingdom things. Do you know the most dangerous lie the enemy has planted in the heart of my church in this age? She asked, forcing me to confront the strategy behind that mass destruction. It's the lie that they are honoring God simply by being good professionals, the lie that overworking is a Christian virtue, a form of witness, the lie that neglecting family for the sake of career is a noble sacrifice to provide. The lie that not having time for myself is an acceptable symptom of a significant and productive life. It masked every one of my excuses, every rationalization I had used for years to soothe my conscience. Not only was I a victim of the culture, I was an active promoter of that demonic theology that dressed idolatry in the garments of Christian responsibility. Then he showed me the eternal destinies of several of those people. I saw a Christian architect famous for his innovative projects, who had designed thousands of magnificent buildings on earth, but who lost his own soul because he never had time to build a relationship with the architect of the universe. I saw a businesswoman who built a multinational company from scratch, a woman celebrated as an example of Christian leadership, but who was spiritually bankrupt. Her soul was as empty as her bank accounts were full. And then, the example that shocked me the most was when I saw a pastor, the leader of a megachurch with thousands of members, so busy managing church growth, leading teams, and planning events that he had forgotten to secretly seek God's face. They have transformed even ministry into work, Jesus lamented. They have transformed my churches into corporations, my pastors into CEOs, and spiritual growth into performance metrics. They are so busy working for me that they no longer have time to be with me. But it was then that he revealed to me the true, human cost of this idolatry. beyond eternal damnation, which broke my heart into a million pieces. He showed me, in a succession of painful visions, the family wreckage left behind by the worship of work. I saw marriages that were merely social contracts, two people living as strangers under the same roof, because their true spouses were their careers. I saw children being raised by nannies and screens, emotionally neglected by workaholic parents who gave them every gift except the one they truly needed, their presence. Every unnecessary extra hour they work is an hour stolen from eternity with their families, Jesus explained. Every weekend they spend at the office is an investment they make in the wrong God. Every moment they choose a project over a person, a deadline over a relationship, they are openly declaring what their true faith is and whom they truly serve. And then he brought the pain into my own home in a way that brought me to my knees. Even in that spiritual dimension, he showed me my 17-year-old daughter, Paloma. The scene was in her bedroom 3 months earlier. She was sitting on her bed, weeping silently, her face streaked with tears. I saw flashes of moments when she had desperately tried to talk to me about the bullying she endured at school, about a boy who harassed her, about dark thoughts that frightened her, but in each of those attempts, I was rushing off to a meeting, my mind on an urgent case, and I dismissed her with a "we'll talk later, dear." And then Jesus revealed the truth my negligence had hidden. "Your daughter tried to take her own life that night," he said, his voice filled with a pain that echoed my own. "He took a bottle of pills. Luckily, her body rejected them, and she vomited. You never knew because you were at a legal conference in another city, a conference you told your husband you absolutely couldn't miss." The tears streaming down my face now weren't from fear of hell, but from a pure, searing agony for my daughter. The naked, raw truth of my life was laid bare. My obsession with professional excellence had not only made me a nominal Christian and an absent wife, it had made me such a negligent mother that my own daughter almost died under my roof, and I didn't even notice her cry for help. The lawyer in me, the defender, was dead. Only the accused remained, guilty on all counts. In a final, pathetic effort to understand, to justify the monster I had become, I pleaded, my voice choked with sobs, "But, Lord, society expects this of us. Bills must be paid, competition in the marketplace is fierce, how could we survive any other way?" It was the final excuse, the last house of cards where I hid. Jesus' response was not an argument, it was a demolition. Society also expected Daniel to bow down and worship Nebuchadnezzar's golden statue, he replied. His voice resonated with the authority of the ages. Elijah's bills also had to be paid when he had to depend on ravens to bring him bread and meat. Competition in the Egyptian court was also fierce when Joseph chose integrity over power, even though it cost him prison. He approached, and his eyes, which had once terrified me, now gazed at me with a compassion that melted me. "You use the pressures of the world as an excuse to worship the gods of the world. You use the need to provide as justification to abandon the provider, but my command has never changed, no matter the culture or the era. Seek first my kingdom." And then, in the depths of my despair, when I had no more defenses or excuses, only the acceptance of my overwhelming guilt, he showed me something that changed my perspective forever. He showed me the true purpose of work, God's original intention. The scene shifted from darkness to light. I saw Christian professionals working with excellence, but also with balance and divine purpose. I saw a doctor who not only treated his patients' bodies, but also silently prayed for each one of them, becoming a channel of physical and spiritual healing. I saw a lawyer who used his knowledge of the law not to enrich himself, but to seek true justice for the oppressed and give a voice to those who could not defend themselves. I saw a businesswoman who built a thriving business whose primary purpose was to serve the community, bless her employees, and fund the work of the kingdom. They were no less excellent, but their excellence served a Lord far greater than their own careers. Work is a blessing when it is in its proper place, Jesus explained. While those images of a redeemed professional life filled me with a hope I hadn't felt in a long time, I created it so that you would exercise creativity, serve one another, and participate in my work of sustaining the world. It becomes a blessing when it is a means and not an end. When it serves the king,